I'm Rad Spicic, and I am happy to be here today with Pablo Alejo, speaking with you about being empowered by design. So, how many of you in the audience today understand the power of design, but aren't necessarily design practitioners yourselves and may not really be sure how to integrate design into your complex digital transformations? Well, I know I count myself as one of those. I have come a long way, but I'm still learning. And in my position as the delivery lead for Accenture, I've seen many digital transformations, and more recently in my Pega work with defense and intel clients, I've seen challenges in digital transformation, but I've also seen where good design work can really make the difference in terms of outcomes, in terms of securing successful outcomes. So this is an evolving field, and we continue to innovate. We innovate with Pega, we innovate with our partners, and we're happy to share with you today some of the experiences that we've had, and hopefully it's something that you'll find interesting and useful in your endeavors. So with me here is the Emmy winner, Pablo Alejo. He is our design studio's growth director, group director rather, and also chief technologist. So that's the Accenture Digital Studio, which is located not too far from here, right in downtown DC. So Pablo is very passionate, obviously, about the subject of design, and he's also a great storyteller. So we're excited to have him kick us off with the story.
Sure, thank you. So first off, thank you so much for allowing me to come here. I like stories, so I want to tell you one, just to kind of give you an idea of what do I mean about design. I promise you it's not something where you've got a bunch of people in the back smoking bongs. It is actually, there's actually a method to this madness. So you're probably familiar with the idea that across the world, people cook with open flames. Okay? In third world countries, it's really hard to get electricity, so you need the ability to cook. In the majority of these communities, women are the ones who are the homemakers, so they are in charge of what this is like. They create the stove themselves. A lot of it is made from within mud within their huts, or they use rocks that are shaped to enable them to cook. Okay, the problem with that is that every year millions of people die from complications from smoke inhalation, and that's a problem. That's a very solvable thing. So how do you fix that? A group of engineers felt that they could solve this problem, and they had come up with a tremendous innovation. They created this stove that would solve this problem. So they took this stove and they went to this community where they had been observing these women cook, and they allowed these women to start cooking with this stove. Within weeks, it hit them really quickly that they had not done their job, and the stove that they had made was not going to work. The main reason why is it kept breaking. So they had made this stove, they gave it to these women, and they were trying to cook with it, and it kept breaking. And the problem was that once it broke, they were not able to fix it. The women did not have access to the technology that was needed to fix it. And so that was a major issue. The other problem was that while it was cost effective to own this stove, and it was cost effective to find the fuel was not readily available. So they had this stove that they would break, and they were not able to actually source it to make it work. So what happens to the stove? The stove goes from being a stove to being a shelf. And what these engineers had designed was never used in the way they thought it was going to be used. I mean, think about it. I mean, they've been camping. They know what it's like to cook over an open flame. You know, you put the pan on there, you put bacon in there, and anything you put in with it's going to taste great. So, you know, they had seen this, and they had watched these women do this job. They figured out they can do this too. The problem was they did not bring the women into the design process in creating the solution. They created the solution for them. How many times have we done this very thing? We see a problem. We've done that thing before. It's not that hard. We create a solution, we give it to them, and before long it ends up just like that stove, collecting dust on the shelf, and it's never used the way that we intended. That's what empowered by design is. It's about bringing the people along who you are actually creating for, but create with. And by doing so, and by using the right principles, which I'll get into later, you create more effective solutions. The reason why is it's all about creating that expectation. Setting that expectation early on so that when someone gets a solution that you create, it's going to work. It's going to work the way they want it. And Rad's going to tell you just a bit about what that means about setting that expectation.
Great. So what do we mean by liquid expectations? I don't know if most of you have probably observed kids playing with technology. And what you see is they're fearless. They jump right in, they intuit, and they can spend hours on the electronics, but I digress. What's important there is that they're building these learned experiences, and they're going to take these experiences with them on as their liquid expectations, and really expect as the adults and users and providers of government services in the future, they're going to expect the same digital experience. And it's not just these kids that are growing up now, it's all of us. I mean, I know for myself that when I'm engaging with an application such as Pega, I don't want to spend a lot of time looking for the information. I don't want to scroll. I don't want to jump from screen to screen. I want my experience with Pega to be seamless. And if I'm using a piece of information to do my daily job, I really want that information to be presented to me when and where and how I need it. So I'm sure all of us, as we go through our digital experiences in our daily lives, have a certain way that we're now accustomed to interacting with technology. So we take those same experiences and we want our government interactions, mission interactions, to be also providing the transparency, visibility, and other capability that we've come to expect. So that's liquid expectations. So how do we sort of address those?
Great question. And really quick, I don't know who's doing the timer, but it says 0, 0, 0. So I guess that means I got like all the time I want.
You get to go forever. So just get comfortable.
You guys are in for a treat. So really quick, let me tell you about what we do. So at the Innovation Studio, or the Liquid Studio, sorry, holy Moses, the Digital Studio. The Digital Studio is a place where we bring a lot of things together. So 5, 6 years ago, Accenture acquired an organization called Fjord. They're a design and innovation company. So if you've ever heard of design companies, Fjord, IDEO, companies like that, Frog, they're in the same space. They use human-centered design, design thinking, and apply it to problem solving. And that's what we do. The reason why is I'd say the more traditional consulting way was not being as effective as it could be because it was pushing more technology than it was humans. And I've lived enough to know that when you push technology, it's great technology, but it doesn't always work the way that I want it. And therefore, it's kind of like the differences of old school taxi versus Uber. You know, taxis will get you from point A to point B, but I'd much rather deal with Uber or something like that. And that's the whole point. And so with this, what we've done is we've taken human-centered design and applied it at the studio with the power of Accenture. What's really cool about Accenture is, man, they're massive, and they do a lot of things with a lot of people. We work with Pega on some of the most complex things there are, and we're working, and Rad leads an entire team that are really solving hard problems, and we're putting humans at the center of that. And it only works when you bring humans in as a part of that solutioning. But the thing is that while that started 6 years ago, we're still working on it. We're still learning. And today we're actually going to share some of those things with you, but it's not been a really easy journey. So any stories on that?
Sure, I do have one. Oh. So yeah, if you, I do want to kind of invite you on a little journey down memory lane. So as Pablo was saying, about 6 years ago or so, Accenture acquired Fjord and decided that the government practice was going to now get immersed in these new capabilities. So it was interesting. One afternoon, we all got summoned in our Accenture Defense and Intel practice down to a DC hotel, much like this. And in the audience, it was a typical, a sea of blue suits, maybe some some gray suits. And then came our presenters. And they were these guys in funky t-shirts and jeans, and they wanted to engage with us. They wanted to ideate, and they wanted us to, oh, this was a kicker. They wanted us to draw our experiences. And I remember vividly thinking to myself, oh, this is going to be interesting. So fast forward a few years. It took us a while, but and now we're really integrated, and I think we met each other halfway. So the people within our design studio have really embraced the government mission. So they really kind of live and breathe this stuff. They understand what makes us tick, the missions that we all support. And then from our from our mission side and from our accounts, we've also kind of try to get comfortable with all of these new ways of doing things. So, so we continue to innovate, but it has been a journey, and they still win on the cool factor. So I know I'm trying to kind of keep up, and I got a couple of stickers on my laptop just to be there with them, but they win.
What you do not know is that Rad has got all these tattoos, like all up and down. It's
yes.
Crazy. So she's just, she's
modest.
Cool. She's cool. So let me talk about digital transformation. So when we think about what digital transformation is, we like to think of it in three areas. There are the services that you provide through the touch points that you create and the culture that you have that enables that. And so let me kind of make some sense of that. So I used to work on Delta Airlines back in my day. And we used to think about Delta Airlines as an adventure experience. Like what they give you, supposedly, hopefully, is to create an adventure. They basically enable you to get from your most wonderful life, whether it's in DC or Boston or where you are, to somewhere really cool like the Bahamas and things like that. And where they're trying to create that experience of adventure. So how do you do that? You do that through the touch points that you create, whether it's mobile apps, iPad applications, kiosks, website, anything that you can touch, feel, interact with. Those are all touch points. But they connect with this overall service that you provide. And it's all not always digital. Some of these services are, think about Chick-fil-A, their service is just good manners. That's a part of their experience. And so they think about it end to end. And so when you think about what your organization does, what is that overall end-to-end service? But what are those touch points that enable that to happen? Finally, I want to talk about culture. It was mentioned earlier about some things about, how do you change culture? And I was at a conference several months back, and this guy said something that I'd heard before, but the way he said it just really hit me. And he said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Who's ever heard that? You guys ever heard that? Okay. I heard that, and I wrote it down. I was like, oh, that's really smart. And I went to eat, and I feel like I do most of my good thinking while I'm eating. And so I was eating, and I was writing some things down. I was like, I really like this thought. But then it hit me, he was dead wrong. Culture eats everything. Think about that just for a second. Culture eats everything. You can have the greatest technology. You can have the smartest people. You can have the greatest strategies and the roadmaps. But if the people within your organization are not willing to adapt and change, it really doesn't matter. It really does not matter. So how do you do that? And transformation is really about, how do you use design to move people with great technology? And so when you think about the work that we're doing, it is more than just giving someone the right thing. Another story I'll quickly tell you is I was talking to someone, and I'm from the South, so if you haven't figured that out yet, I apologize. But anyway, we were talking about this idea. You ever heard the phrase, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink? Okay? I was always growing up with that, mainly because my mama was always yelling at me and for not doing something that she told me that I was supposed to do. And it hit me. I was like, yeah, you're right, but our job is to make people thirsty. We got to make thirsty horses, people. And that's the goal with this, is how do you take great technology, how do you make thirsty horses? And digital transformation is really about how you do that. And it's an end-to-end thing. So really quick, what I want to do is kind of transition into what we've been learning. What have we learned over the last 6 years that you can apply today? And the first thing I want to tell you is think of as one. we have this concept at our studio called as one. No logos, no egos is a phrase that we say. At Accenture, we have the fortunate pleasure to work with tremendous partners and to work with really great clients. But there was this one time where we brought a group in, and we had our partner, and we had us, and then we had our client, and everyone was jockeying to figure out who was going to lead this thing and who was more important than the other person. And we were trying to achieve a goal. And in the end, we got where we were wanting to. However, the process that it took to get there was really, really painful. And it was because we brought our logos in. We brought our egos in. And what we've learned from that is from day one, we set up a team and we say, we are one. We are either going to rise together or we're going to fall together. But it happens as one. There are no barriers. You have my cell phone number. If you need to call me, here. If I need to call you, here. But in the end, we align on the goal and we figure out how to get there together. Now that kind of goes into integration, which will Rad also talk about co-creation.
Absolutely. So one of the very important things for us was realizing that we really need to move past requirements and really think about experiences. And you've heard it today, you've heard it from Alan. He talked about keeping heart at the center. And Don also mentioned just really focusing on that customer experience. And once you do that, you begin to empathize. That was another key word from Pega World this year to the talks from this morning. It's really empathizing with your stakeholder and understanding what's important to them. Because we all deliver with this scaled agile or agile type principles, but what's important in agile is to understand how to prioritize. And if you keep your customers and your stakeholders and your citizen in your mind and you empathize with them, then it's easy to kind of get to arrive at those trade-offs and to prioritize your work. So we really feel very strongly that keeping the culture of co-creation at the center of this is key. So intentional timing. So what do I mean by intentional timing? Well, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is really focusing on showing your work. So as was mentioned before, I have a PhD in mathematics. So in my previous life, I was a professor. And I always really enjoyed kind of working through proofs, and you come to the end, and it's just really beautiful and pure, and you kind of put a box around your answer, and you say QED. Okay, so my Latin pronunciation is rusty, but what that actually means is that which had to be demonstrated. So I would wait until the end to demonstrate the point. And when I came into consulting, I realized, well, this is kind of a different gig. This is all about collaboration. It's all about showing your work along the way. And it's no different when we try to insert design elements into our day-to-day deployments and development. It's really about showing your stakeholders, showing people that you work with, showing your teams what you're working on. So really not waiting to kind of show them those prototypes, those developmental points, but actually just do that along the way. So that was one big learning. And the other point that I'll mention is, so I mentioned scaled agile. So we're all doing very complex systems, as was mentioned with census and obviously the CTA agency. So one of the things that naturally comes about on a large project like that is this natural tension that happens between the designers and the designer community and the developers in that community. And whether your model for kind of how you get all these teams to work together is distributed, or perhaps you have a centralized model, meaning that how your design and your development work together, it really doesn't matter. There's a couple of things that are important to keep in mind. So one is that if you can get your developers to be a sprint or two ahead, or more as you can, ahead of your development, because that minimizes any type of rework that is needed. And again, in terms of some of the things that I was talking about earlier, as long as you are displaying your work, you are kind of sharing your prototypes. That also will reduce that digital gap that Alan was speaking about earlier. So very important concept, and some illustrations of where I see that kind of fitting in.
Excellent. Now the final thing is this concept of thinking holistically. I had a client come in and they were focused on recruiting. So they were like, you know what, we need to fix this recruiting problem. We know what piece of software we want to use. Can you help us make this happen? We started looking at their challenge and we realized that there was a bigger opportunity for them to go beyond just their siloed view of things and think more holistically about the overall HR process. What does it look like from hire to retire? So he brought some other people in to this conversation and completely changed the game for them. And what they realized was that the things they needed were being impacted by other people, and what they were doing was also impacting other people. But by bringing everyone in the same room, you could actually have that conversation. And so when you're doing the things that you're doing, and one of the things we find is that we always like to take a step back and just for a moment to see, are we thinking of everything that we need to be? Or are we just too narrow in the scope of what we're thinking? Now, what's nice about that is sometimes that, from a funding perspective, you can take money from other places and kind of pool it together to enable that to happen. I've got a team of people who are working on kind of flushing this thing out for this client, but the idea, though, is the end result will be much more powerful because they were not thinking of just their own group. They were thinking much broader about the overall need. And so when we look at these things, these are the things that we've learned over the last 6 years. And so as you start to apply design to your organizations, keep that in mind. And this all happens under a process. We think about innovation as taking forever. Innovation can happen in weeks. And a lot of things that we do, it takes 12 to 16 weeks to do some of the concepting for us to create the strategies that we use. But then once you start delivering, then it's something that happens on within agile space. So it's happening each sprint. But it starts with discovery. Had the engineers who were making the stove in my original story actually ask questions and ask the questions right, but then in the describe phase brought them into the conversation. By going from there into the design, they would have designed with the women of those communities to actually create something. That way, then when you started getting into development, they're with you in the development just to make sure that you're working it right. That way, when you're ready to release, you have what you need to then scale out. All with that prototyping underneath. And you have this really good scaled agile process kind of helping you get through things quickly. And this is not rocket science. It definitely takes a different type of person to do it. I will say, and not everyone has to have tattoos to make it happen. But I promise you, it's a different way of looking at things. And just to kind of give you an idea, this is what sometimes this looks like. We have these rooms called rumble rooms where we bring clients in, bring our partners in, and we have these conversations. And some of these conversations can get pretty tense. When you are in an organization where you are learning every one of their pain points and you bring those people into a room together and you surface those tensions, there is conflict. There was actually one situation where the client stood up and said, "I object to this." And then we had a 3-star general who said, "Please follow me." And they walked out and he came back and he's like, "I feel really good about this. I feel really good about this." So in the end, it's about co-creation. It's about doing things a little bit differently. And sometimes you just need to ask the wrong questions to get at the right ones, just so you can get the right answers. So just think about that. Think about that.
Great. So just to wrap up, we work very closely with Pega, and we continue to innovate, to find ways to insert design into digital transformation. And one of the things that we're focusing on now is rapid prototyping on the Pega platform. So making sure that our government clients are not buying Pega as a shiny object, but Pega as a solution, as an integrated solution on the cloud platform with all of these other things that we talked about and offerings that this technology has. So we also hope that some of the experiences that we've had enlightened you somewhat. We talked about collaboration, working as one. We talked about the importance of timing and really pulling it all together holistically. So we want to thank you for your attention today and hope that you are going to visit us at the booth outside. Thanks.
Thank you.